I think we're now ready for our next speaker. Over to Alexander Lichter to talk about Nuxt, Strapi, and the composition API. Over to you, Alexander. Take it away.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for the introduction. And of course, thanks for having me here at StrapiConf. My topic is Strapi plus Nuxt.js plus the composition API equals love. And you'll know why in a minute. Okay, a few words about me, even though you know almost everything important about me already. So yeah, I'm Alex. I'm a Nuxt.js core maintainer. I have a Twitter handle, so if you want to follow me for info about Vue, Nuxt, clean code, whatever, feel free to go there. Yeah, and also shoot me a DM if you have any questions. I blog every now and then, and I probably should post more often. Also about the same topics: front-end development, SEO, refactoring, clean code, JavaScript, Vue, Nuxt, you name it. So if you're interested in that, check out my website and blog. And yeah, when I'm not giving talks or doing open source, I'm a web development consultant at my own company, Development. What is Nuxt.js? Well, Nuxt is a framework on top of Vue.js, Vue 2 to be precise, and it comes with Vue 2 itself, Vue Router, Vue Meta, and if you like, Vuex for state handling, global state handling. And also, under the hood, it uses a couple of build tools like Webpack, Babel, PostCSS. Yeah, and of course, there's some more logic and magic sprinkled on top of it. But yeah, that's the rough stack of Nuxt. And maybe some of you think now, wait, well, Vue is a framework already. So why should I use a framework on top of another framework, right? And fair thoughts. But the point is, of course, to make a developer's life easier. Ideally, the life of all of you, right? So how does Nuxt aim to do that? So there are a couple of points. First of all, Nuxt comes with batteries included. It is optimized, also very versatile. It is modular and very important for developers, of course, developer friendly. So yeah, let's take each of these points and see what it actually means. Okay, there we go. Batteries included. So as I mentioned, Nuxt includes several common libraries that almost every medium to large scale application needs. Medium to large scale Vue application, right? So yeah, Vue Router for routing, Vuex if you want for global state handling, and Vue Meta for meta tags, title changes, and so on. So especially for SEO, but not only. And also, it comes with build tools configured out of the box. So yeah, we have PostCSS and auto prefixer, we have Babel to transpile your code, and we have Webpack to build and bundle your application. And there are configs already for all of these. So if you want to change something, you can do that. But if you just want to give it a go and fine tune later, that's totally fine. And also, Nuxt provides a basic but flexible folder structure, which we will see in a minute. So I'll explain a bit more then. And also, Nuxt supports so-called file system-based routing, which I will explain as well too. And Nuxt supercharges your Vue components. So first of all, Nuxt comes with a layout concept. So you can have several layout components as wrapper around your pages. You can switch them, for example, if you're mobile or not, if you want to see a sidebar or not. So there's a lot of flexibility there. Also, Nuxt improves the transition handling. I mean, Vue has already very, very nice interface for transitions, but Nuxt also handles a few complex situations. For example, what happens when you switch between pages, which transitions should be applied, and so on. And Nuxt provides a few Vue component functions to make, for example, data fetching a breeze. Okay. I mentioned folder structure, and well, generally speaking, there can be many folders, and you can create whatever folder you want, right? If you think you need a helper folder or a utils folder, go for it. Just create it. It's not like mandatory in Nuxt, but you can use it because, well, you want to group your code somehow. There's also kind of a minimal structure that almost every app needs. And to be fair, you can even strip out, for example, the components folder if you say like it's just one page. So each of these folders has a specific purpose, and we will figure that out later. Just want to show, like, if you create a new Vue component now, you likely would put it under components or under pages if it represents a page. If you have like an CSS file you want to put somewhere, it comes into assets. And lots of cases, or for example, an image also would live in assets. So lots of cases are covered there, and don't have to think about where should I place this now. That's tricky. And you feel home in so many other projects because the folder structure is similar, at least. And yeah, file system routing. That's a really cool part. So I already showed you the folder structure, and you've noticed the pages folder there, which is quite important because that's our base point for the whole routing part. If you have like a basic Vue application, you would write a routed.js file with all the routes and components, and Nuxt has an abstraction layer on top that just uses the file system to create that router config. So for example, if you have a page that has an index file, so just example.com/ and then a bunch of articles. So example.com/article/1, 2, 3, or using slugs, not IDs, as you like. And an index page for the articles, so example.com/articles. That's how your structure would look like, displayed on a slide. And what is happening now is that based on that folder structure and files, Nuxt will create your router config on build time. So during the build, it will figure out which files are there, which files are being used. It will create references and eventually create the router definition with the routes. Nice. Okay, so far so good. Batteries included. Lots of flexibility there, but also a few things you don't have to do the heavy lifting. And Nuxt is optimized. And what optimized means is that it's quite small by default, so 58 KB minified in gzip. Also, Nuxt brings code splitting by default, so you don't have to load the whole application, only the app shell and the current route it's used, like global styles, global plugins, whatever. As mentioned before, sensible default webpack configs, also regarding when to split files, is it necessary now or not. Again, you can tweak that if you need it and if you like, but it's the 80/20 rule again. Usually the base config is, I guess, well better than the old project if you had one. Also, there's asset fingerprinting and cache busting. So if you have like a static image and you use that, and during the build time, there will be a hash attached. So if you change it at one point, the cache will be invalidated and users will see the fresh new image and not the old one. Also, there's modern mode, so you don't have to ship all that IE 11 or whatever code to Evergreen browsers if you have to support IE 11. So Evergreen browsers gets untranspiled JavaScript that's not modified so IE can understand it, for example. And there's smart prefetching, which means we will prefetch files if there is a link in the viewport and the connection is good, and no data saver is enabled. So Nuxt does a prefetching there, and if the user clicks the links, then the JavaScript files don't have to load then because they're already loaded. Of course, after content of the current page. So lots of cool features, and there's even more. I just had to handpick a few things here. Okay. And then Nuxt is very versatile. Versatility, okay. I talk about especially rendering modes here. We could also talk about platforms, so where could Nuxt run, where it could be deployed, but let's focus on render modes here. So yeah, first of all, you can build clean, plain old SPAs, single page applications with a single HTML file, eventually some JavaScript assets, some images, and so on. Not a problem at all. But you can also use Nuxt.js with dynamic server-side rendering. So you would have Nuxt.js and a Node.js server running all the time, and every time a user comes to the page, so the initial request, it will go to the Node.js server, and the Node server will give out the full HTML of the requested page plus the JavaScript, so it can be an SPA afterwards. And we also have static site generation. So instead of having a server running all the time, we generate all the content during the build time, Jamstack style, and then just push it to a CDN. Yeah, and let's see how this actually works. So when we use an SPA, as I said, the browser will do request to the CDN, and it will just return an almost empty HTML file plus JavaScript. So the HTML file is not empty because it includes the script definitions and usually a loading spinner, because there's nothing else you would see then except blank screen. And then the site is, well, I would say not completely ready, because the JavaScript parsing has to happen as well. So JavaScript comes there, the browser still sees the loading screen, parse the JavaScript, and then the content is still not there. So we need to do an API request. And now after the API response, it's the client again or the browser again, the page is fully visible and interactive. Okay, and dynamic SSR, well, it's a bit more tricky here. So the first thing is we do a request to the Node server, and the Node server will do a request to the API. Ideally, that's cached, but depends on the data, of course. And the JSON returned from your API will be used from the Node.js server, so it can include the data from the API inside your HTML, because that's where you want data for SEO, for example. So it will not only return the JavaScript and an empty HTML file, no, it will return the current requested page as full HTML. And the good thing is now the page content is fully visible. So as soon as the client gets the info, they already see content. But we still have to do some parsing and the so-called hydration, where Vue is taking the HTML that has been generated and makes it reactive. So it transforms it into Vue's own representation. Well, and then, you could do another API call if you want, but from that point on, it's a clean old SPA. And as I said, there's static site generation. So we have a generation step, and actually there's a Node.js server that again sends a request to the API. JSON will be returned, and similar to dynamic SSR, we get HTML and JavaScript. But now it's not returned to a browser because there's no browser in that step. It will just be rendered out as HTML file and be saved somewhere. And then we have the client step, where we do the request to the CDN where the HTML and JavaScript files are lying. So we get the response and again the hydration, but it's super quick because the Node.js server doesn't have to do that on the fly. The content is already there. Okay, so far so good regarding versatility. Now we can talk about being modular. So in my opinion, having some kind of modularity is quite important because we all don't want to reinvent the wheel. I mean, so many people integrated like, I don't know, Kubernetes, Algolia, Strapi in their projects, and you don't want to do it by hand every time. So it's super important to have some kind of abstraction layer that, well, resolves that for you. Ideally, that's also isolated and testable, which is the case here too. And the good thing is here that modules, so Nuxt modules, they can hook into various workflows of the framework. So they can, for example, hook into the HTML generation, say, or general file generation, say, let's generate another file. Or when you use dynamic SSR, hook into the whole process. Or before this HTML will be sent to a client, please add something here or strip something there. So there's, again, lots of flexibility and sky's the limit, almost. Plus, modules are great to share across projects and also through open source. Which brings me to a shameless plug here. We have a site called modules.nuxt.js.org, which shows all Nuxt community modules and also official modules. So yeah, 166 modules, 10.8 million downloads in the last 30 days and 160 maintainers. Kudos to all of those who maintain a couple of modules. Right, and then we have developer friendliness. So before losing a few words, I just want to show a few screenshots. This one of the compilation process. Then when Nuxt.js is running, you see all the important info, which mode, which rendering mode, memory usage, which URL, and so on. And also a loading screen, so the counterpart to the console on the upper left screenshot. So there, we always try to solve things in an elegant manner, of course, and also in a way that helps you as a developer. But more important than that are meaningful error messages, of course. So if something goes wrong, ideally you know what to do, or at least where to Google. For documentation. So also a very important point we're always working on. Improving documentation, also in lots of languages, not only English. And we're always thankful for PRs being translations or typo fixes or fully new chapters. We also have a Discord for help, suggestions, and of course chit-chatting. So feel free to join us there. Plus lots of solutions that are being used in Nuxt.js, like that cool bar we've seen a couple of screens ago. They're all used and open sourced, so even other frameworks can use them and actually use them. So it's not only open source good for the framework, it's for the whole ecosystem. Yeah, so these are the points. And before we get started with the code, I also want to talk briefly about the composition API, because that's, I would say not the main focus of Nuxt right now, of Nuxt 2 at least. So composition API is a new API concept for writing Vue components, and you might have heard of it already because it's available in Vue 3. There was a whole RFC about that. It's, of course, not deprecating the options API, it's additional. And the good thing is it has been backported more or less through a plugin in Vue 2. And eventually there's a Nuxt module. So the Nuxt module combines the composition API with all Nuxt features, because by default, it's the Vue composition API. It's not covering like server-side rendering and stuff. Yeah. So I would say let's build our frontend now in the next 12 minutes. And let's see where we go. Okay, so I've built a small frontend with Nuxt, Strapi, and the composition API because time is scarce and we can use it efficient now. So yeah, let's take a look. As usual, you'll find the code online, and you'll figure out the link in a second. So in our package.json, we have some scripts, like we can start a dev server, and we should really do that now. We can also build our application for production, start the dynamic SSR server or HTTP server for like previewing stuff. We can generate our pages. We have some dependencies like the composition API and Strapi module, core.js, Nuxt itself, and if you want, also types for TypeScript. Okay. Before we deep dive into localhost 3000, I would take a look at Nuxt config. So in here, the first thing we set is a target, which is quite important so Nuxt knows whether we want to deploy as a dynamic SSR or Jamstack, static site generation approach. In this case, we chose, of course, static, but we could also write server and things would change easily. Then we also have a head global object. In here, we can set a default title, meta tags like the char set, but also include style sheets like I did here with Sakura CSS, so I don't have to mess around with the styles. Next, we can include Nuxt plugins. For example, we did with a preview plugin, and I will show that in a bit. And then we have to add our modules. So we have TypeScript build and composition API because they're only needed during the build time, especially the composition API because this will be transpiled and added. It's not that we can't use it in runtime. But Strapi, for example, if you want to use dynamic SSR, might interfere at runtime and do something more complex. So it will be added to modules. Also, if you're worrying whether you should put it in build modules or modules, usually the modules say what you should do. So in documentation of composition API, it will say added to build modules. And there you go. And for Strapi, we also have a config here, a small config. So we set our URL to Strapi Nuxt backend, and we set the entities we use to pages and articles. Okay, now let's take a look. This is our small frontend. So we have an index page with some test content. We have an articles overview page with 2 articles, each with a heading and a photo. And if you click on them, we have articles/ID with the same heading and photo and some text. Perfect. And just so you know that this really comes from Strapi, let's just change things. Remove these gibberish letters here and reload the page. It's gone. So this really comes from Strapi Nuxt backend. Okay, so let's see how we actually get the data. This is our pages index file that's responsible for, in this case, localhost 3000/. Okay, so in a template, we just render the page title as an h1, the page content, and a hint about the source code. The script part is more interesting, I think. So what is happening here is that we actually import a few things from Nuxt.js composition API module, for example, ref. If you don't know what ref is, that's a new reactivity concept. So to, well, avoid messing around with referencing other non-primitives like objects or arrays, we now use page value, for example, here to access the value. So it's wrapped. And that's ref is just a name for reactive reference. So the cool part here is that it will track itself. So if it changes somewhere, the value there changes too, similar to Vue 2 data, but now with that dot value in between. You have to get used to it, but it's very powerful. Okay, important, this ref we get from the Nuxt composition API here is the same ref that we get from the Vue plugin as well. It's just re-exported for your convenience. Now, every component declaration is wrapped into defined components, so we get type completion and auto completion, of course. Okay, now we have the setup function where all the logic is in. And there's our first composable. In line 15, we get $strapi from use context. And use context is just a way to get the Nuxt context, which is now usually a good way to get module instances. It also existed before the composition API, for example, through async data or the Vue X Store or plugins. So this is a quite well-known concept in Nuxt. And in here, it's the easiest way to get the Strapi module. Okay, so we use context, also imported. And then we create a page ref with the default value of an empty object. So if we would do page value now, it would return that empty object. Oops, there we go. Okay, and now we have another composable now for data fetching called useFetch. And this works similar to the fetch of Nuxt without a composition API. I mean, that's kind of the goal, right? If you don't know what it does, no worries, I'll show you. So there is an async function callback. And in here, what are we doing? Well, in line 19, we await a Strapi call. So Strapi.$pages, because pages is the name of our collection. So find all pages where the title is indexed. And because there could be multiple, we only want the first one. We use array destructuring. And now, after awaiting that call, we set the value of the page ref to that first page object. So the cool thing is Nuxt will wait for that call to resolve on the server side. So all content that comes from useFetch will be available in the template. During navigation, it will also resolve the promise at some point, but it won't wait. So that's why at first there might not be any content here, and after resolving the request and the promise, the content will show up. We can also show some loading state, but I'll show you this later. Yeah, we have also used meta as another composable. And in here we can set, for example, the title tag. And I just set it to the value of the title of that actual page, if it exists. So the title is always, in this case, index. There we go. Yeah, and then eventually we return page, so we can use it in the template. And now we could go further and say, if there's logic across the board and across multiple components we can reuse, we can put it into composables, but I want to have it as well simple as possible here. So I just stick with that implementation. Okay, so let's take a look at articles. In here, we also use fetch, and I mentioned that we can also show loading states, and this is what we're doing here. So we have fetch state pending, so if it's still a pending promise, show that loading state. And this happens here. We could also use like, we can also do set timeout, I would say. And then wrap that around new promise. So classic resolve and resolve in here. So resolve the promise after, say, 500 milliseconds. So we wait that, and you see that loading now a bit clearer and longer, of course. Okay, so I would stop that again because it's not important. But we can visualize loading states now. We can also see if there's an error with fetch_state.error, for example. And if we want, we say we can check both. If it's not pending, not an error, it's successful and data's there. Okay, besides that, we just iterate over all the articles we get. We create a Nuxt link to connect the pages, the detail page, and our overview page. And the link is just, the link includes the h3, so the heading and the image. Cool. Again, we get our content through useFetch, the same way we did it before, with an await call to $Strapi articles find without any query params, because we want to get all articles. Perfect. And now let's take a look at that detail here, because now we have to incorporate it ID. And articles_ID is a special file because all _page view files are meant to be dynamic page components, because we don't know if there's like 1, 2, 3, 500. We don't know the ID. That's why we have the prefix with that underscore. And we can use that because we also signalized Nuxt through file-based routing. Okay, ID is a parameter. Okay, what is happening here? Well, article title shown, image shown, content shown. Easy so far. Again, the script part is important. So in here, we get the Strapi module again. And in this case, we also get the route. Interesting is that the route is a computer property here, but in the composition API world, computer properties are kind of read-only refs, so we have to use routed value again, which you also see in line here, in line 15, but also in line 19 below. So again, we create an empty ref, or a ref with a default value of an empty object, and we use fetch to get the articles. Here it's interesting that we use routed value.params ID to find that one article with the correct ID, and then just set a value. Yeah, and that's it. Of course, you want to do like error handling and stuff for sure, but this is way more. I mean, it's not too complex. We can just add a vif and show, oh, there's an error, because we can use fetch state. Say, oh, let's do it right here. Let's say div. Oops. Fetch state dot error. Then we say, oops, error or chord, and some more info maybe. Chord, perfect. Right. Maybe we should generate our site now with generate. And now we see the Nuxt is building our site easily. And then it will generate the sites. But you see that now here in the console, we have generate routes. First was slash, then articles 1 and 2. And you may wonder, how does Nuxt know which articles it has to generate? Because we know underscore ID is a dynamic parameter. And the answer is there's a crawler. So it will first get home, so index. We'll see, oh, there's a link to articles. It will generate articles and see, articles 1 and 2 are linked. I have to generate these two. Of course, you could also specify routes or exclude routes, but that's the way to go here. And now we can start our HTTP server to check out the files in dist here. We can also open them already. So say articles to index.html, and we see the content here already. This is important. So the content is already in HTML. This is no pure single page application anymore because the content is in the HTML. Okay, so let's load our site, and there we go. Important part is here now that everything is static. So if I change this again to something, reload the whole page, there is no change because now the content is already included inside the so-called payload file in the dist folder. So you can't change that anymore. That's deep here in that underscore Nuxt folder. So you can't change the content because it's down here. Now the only problem is, well, what if I want to do like previews? And that's where the preview plugin we've added comes in. So let's check it out. Export default define Nuxt plugin, again, a helper. If type of query preview is not undefined, okay, yep, then preview mode enabled and enable preview. So what is happening here is that if we use preview, equals true, or t, it doesn't matter. That was the wrong URL because that was not the running server, that was the dev server. So again, preview equals true. We have the content right here. So the content can change and there will be requests again. So now everything works again, completely dynamic. But if the preview mode is not enabled for a client, it's a fully static site again. So that's the beauty here. So you can still have a preview mode with Strapi without leaving the boundaries of a static site. Okay. So this is all possible by enabling this inside the Nuxt plugin through enable preview. Again, you can use whatever combination, like a secret token, whatever you might like. Yeah, and then before we leave off, then we have a layouts file, because across the side we have this home articles, breadcrumbs more or less here, and this is just a layout that is actually the default layout, default Vue for all pages with a navbar and then the 2 Nuxt links. Okay, cool. I think, yeah, let's wrap it up. That was our small front-end info. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you give Strapi Nuxt, the composition API, a chance. If you want more info, feel free to DM me also if you have any questions. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Alexander, for that brilliant talk. Really nice stuff in there as well. So I hope you've all been taking notes and gaining some real value from these speakers. Really nice to see as well, just some pro tips for Nuxt users. So yeah, amazing stuff. Thank you, Alexander.